Hello, I'm Mike Okuda, and I'm here with a distinguished panel of experts to talk about Star Trek I. With me is...
I'm Denise Okuda.
Judy Reeves-Stevens.
Gar Reeves-Stevens.
And I'm Darren Doctorman.
Now, Star Trek the Motion Picture, between Star Trek the original series and Star Trek the Motion Picture was like over 10 years, an amazingly long drought.
And the drought actually started to lift around 1974 when Paramount started talking to Gene Roddenberry about perhaps doing a Star Trek movie. And by 1975, he was on the lot, and they had two writers going.
They had Chris Bryant and Alan Scott, I think, who were the authors of the screenplay for Don't Look Now.
And they wrote a movie called Star Trek Planet of the Titans. And we can talk about that a bit later, but Paramount didn't want to make that one.
And this was the Missing Link series that occurred in the 70s that would have come after the original series and prior to Next Generation.
So this actually began, the very first draft of this particular movie was a 2-hour television pilot written by Harold Livingston based on a story by Alan Dean Foster and Gene Roddenberry. And what we're listening to here is an overture, which very few I don't think any movies have now. I think the last one was The Black Hole.
Yeah, it was this and The Black Hole were the last ones.
And each star actually represents the number of screenplay rewrites.
I think there are more.
It's a beautiful score, though. Just really lovely. And here we go. 10 years more in the waiting.
And that's exactly what it was like for the fans and the audience, just to see. They were just waiting for those names even to go up on screen.
Such applause.
And I remember there was such applause for each one of them.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I and some friends were actually at the Chinese theater in Hollywood when this opened. And we remember when the marquees were put up on outside the theater. And those got big applause.
Yeah.
Gar and I were up in Canada representing the rest of North America.
Yeah. And what was wonderful was the Star Trek fan club in Toronto. They took part in the opening day festivities, and they all showed up in costume. It was great.
The thing that I most remember is that I had been a young kid at the time, about 12 when it opened. But I still was a Star Trek fan since about 1973 with the animated show. And so when I started reading in Starlog magazine all these reports about them making a Star Trek movie, I was very excited and just sort of continued on with the story of this production as much as they were telling at the time. And seeing the first images of the new Enterprise just thrilled me to no end, and they still do.
That's not the Enterprise.
No.
I think this is perhaps one of the best pieces of science fiction cinema ever made, this sequence.
Oh, this is cool.
Of course, from this shot, you immediately realize, okay, this is a movie, this is big.
Yeah.
This is
Because there are 3 ships.
Yes, there's 3 of them. 3 of them at once on the screen.
And yet, of course, there was only one model.
Right. The more important thing is they each have separate they each share a vanishing point.
And this, we remember that this was a very difficult shot doing this one.
Absolutely. It blew our socks off.
But also, this shot absolutely pays respect to Matt Jefferies' original design. You can see, even though this is a motion picture, even though it's upgraded, this is Matt Jefferies' Klingon battlecruiser.
What we found fascinating, too, in writing The Art of Star Trek is this cloud effect.
Oh, my.
Well before there was CGI. That was actually Codolith, a big transparency, just black and white artwork that was exposed in different positions.
It was basically artwork on a hinge, and they basically moved it around during time-lapse exposures to create the pattern on there.
And right into action.
Mark Leonard.
And more of that beautiful out of focus.
Well, we love this movie. Didn't do too well with the critics, and Time magazine really slammed it. And one of the things the reviewer complained about was that at the beginning, this alien entity has these strange alien creatures in it, but where are they at the end? And the guy had completely missed the point that the Klingons were separate and attacking.
Yeah.
And actually, you do see the Klingons if you frame by frame the mind meld, but we'll get into that later. I love these readouts. I think they were done by Apogee. Just very cool.
Of course, this presentation of the Klingons is all brand new. Never seen these costumes, and the head ridges were brand new.
The head ridges. The head ridges are always different with the Klingons.
Right. Actually, it wasn't until Star Trek V that they got changed for individuals.
I think it's fun to listen to the voiceover comm talk. You can pick up a lot of stuff.
They call this guy Rubber Man.
Yes, that's right.
Woo!
It's a
That's
beautiful model.
Oh, incredible. I know for the concept art for 2001: A Space Odyssey, Kubrick wanted to show astronauts completing the Discovery space station, and that was an element that didn't go into the film. So it was great to see this here.
There are a lot of ties between 2001 and this film, not necessarily directly, but of course some of the key people involved in this, Douglas Trumbull was heavily involved in 2001, and this is, can very well be called a child of 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And that same view of space being portrayed realistically, even
Yes.
in what some people think of science fantasy.
There's David Gautreaux, who
Would have been Zahn
absolutely
in Phase 2.
in Phase 2, a full Vulcan science officer. Yes.
So he was hired for Phase 2.
I have an exterior visual.
The nice thing they did for him was they gave him this role as Commander Branch, and they got another actor to play
Zahn.
Sonak. And they killed Sonak instead of Zahn so
Yes.
that Zahn would be available in case they decided to go back and make a television series after this movie.
And when I found out that David Gautreaux was going to be in the motion picture, I actually went and saw a one-man play with Gene Roddenberry, some other friends, and really liked him. So when I found out that he was just going to have a very small part, I was very disappointed. Because I think he's good. He delivers his lines well.
Oh, yes.
So of course we've already seen the Klingons being portrayed in the original series as real, meanies and powerful, and now we see this dangerous cloud basically making mincemeat out of them with no trouble at all.
Well, that's one of the rules of writing. You have to show how bad your villain is by showing the things it can destroy.
And then your heroes are that much bigger for overcoming them at the end.
Of course, that actress there is Michelle Billy, who later married John Povil, who was Gene Roddenberry's assistant and later story editor, I believe, on Phase 2.
Yep.
Yes.
And bless him, he saved all his files.
He did.
And we went through them. We got
Yeah.
them from his garage.
Meanwhile, on Vulcan,
That has no moons.
If this is Vulcan.
it's not a moon, it's just a very large, round
Rock,
thing with
yeah.
its
Yeah.
other friend.
That's right.
Or is this Vulcan? Maybe it's on the planet of many moons.
It could be.
Well, and this element of Spock with the Vulcan Masters comes from the God thing. This is where we were going to see Spock in that script.
Now, they shot part of this on distant location in Yellowstone, did they not?
Yes, at the hot springs.
But most of this stuff was actually at B Tank at Paramount.
In the parking lot.
Where Gracie the Whale was years
Yep.
later.
Yeah, they built that big red foot out there in the parking lot and just stood him up in front of it and put paintings behind them.
I think it's really interesting here if you look at the Vulcans and watch their lips. They're speaking
Yes.
English, and later on the Vulcan was looped in, so you can actually see that they're
And it had to
speaking.
match.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
had to match
so-
the English
yeah.
lip movement.
Well, an interesting thing when I was working on the director's edition of this film, we actually took the subtitles and mixed them around just a little bit so that
Oh,
the
yes.
subtitles wouldn't match up precisely with the lip movements, because previously they had.
Yeah. You know, it's really interesting. Mike and I worked with Christie's for the auction, and that necklace, the Cullinan necklace, went for $13,000.
Wow, I thought you had to go through Colinar to get one of those.
No, I guess if you have enough money, you can buy anything.
The only time we saw Vulcan before this was in Amok Time, but of course, here with the motion picture, you can see they could build so much more, even for this short scene.
And the ears were being cast from the original molds.
And definitely in the God thing, it was the giant object was conscious, and Spock sensed it. But in the God thing, there were 9 Vulcan masters.
Must have been a budget thing.
I don't know if this was intentional, but you can see on the necklace the 6-sided object that I like to think represents perfect total logic. And you can also see on the ground there are 6-sided
Yes.
objects. And interestingly enough, V'ger itself is 6-sided. So maybe there's some kind of a design element in there that we previously didn't know about.
Oh, that's cool, Darren. I never thought of
I
that.
didn't either.
Oh,
And
here
this,
we
of
go,
course, is
San
our
Francisco.
first real
San
glimpse of
Francisco.
23rd century Earth.
Well, the cage. We had the.
That's why I said first real glimpse.
Oh, okay.
Besides, that was an illusion. Such a simple scene, but it says so much about Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future.
And wow,
Yeah.
here he is,
Yay.
Captain Kirk.
Oh, the Shat.
The man.
Look at him.
What an entrance.
And now they seem so young, but at the
Oh.
time we hadn't seen them for a long time, and they
Seems so
seemed
old.
rather old.
Yes.
The costumes are fascinating. This is Fred Phillips, because when Robert Wise, who had never seen a Star Trek episode, took on the job of directing, he screened episodes and in, I guess, a theater at Paramount, and found that the brightly colored costumes of the television series intended for the small screen, he found them too garish for the big screen. So these muted colors came into play.
Following that meeting, report to me in 1 hour.
The one alien that was in the middle at the back there with the red robe, apparently that fabric was chosen by Cecil B. DeMille back in 1939 for a show.
Recycling.
Wow.
Here, of course, is the Space Office complex. I think this was the first shot done by, in the film, done by Trumbull's group, I believe. And you'll notice the space pod that Scotty and Kirk take later isn't actually on the office complex at this point, so we can assume that they bring it into park at some point before they leave.
Just at the last moment.
Yeah. Just-in-time inventory.
And of course, this became the regular One station in Star Trek II later on. There's the missing pod.
One of the early notes on the script pointed out that in the design of this one, they had to have a double-door airlock, because otherwise when the pod took off, all the paperwork would blow out the opening.
Important safety tip.
Admiral, Mr. Scott, those
Shatner keeping a little of his body language from the original show to let the optical people know when to stop the effect.
temporary. Admiral, we have just finished 18 months redesigning and refitting.
Just in case you didn't know, Scotty's going to tell you.
Yeah.
I don't think it says it in the novelization, but Scotty's mustache, I think, is a sentient being.
Great.
Rick Sternbach told me that he designed a bunch of the control panels on this movie, including the control panel on the travel pod, even though you actually don't see it. He said he came into work one morning and is immediately told, "Go down to stage. Mr. Wise wants to talk to you." And he had Rick tell Jimmy Doohan what buttons to push to fly the travel pod.
It looks like he got it right.
Obviously.
Crew haven't had near enough transition time with all the new equipment.
Scotty, stop complaining, for crying out
The
loud.
engines not even tested at warp power.
But again, this story element that shows up in a lot of these films, which is the ship isn't quite ready, the crew isn't quite ready. It's putting the obstacles in front of everyone.
But the origin of it, as I understand it, was that back when this was a TV movie, they weren't sure the sets were going to be ready. So the idea was they wanted to have an excuse to have unfinished sets.
But that requires just as much work.
Actually, it requires more
More
work,
work.
because you always want to show open panels. So first you have
Yeah.
to build the panel,
That's right.
then you have to build the guts inside of them.
But she'll be ready.
And of course, we all know that the Enterprise was built in space above San Francisco.
Of course it is. Here it is.
Yes.
In this timeline.
In this
Yeah,
timeline,
yeah,
it
yeah.
is.
Look at him. Look at him sell it. Look at that.
Yeah.
Boom.
And that's part of also of particularly of this one too, is that the actors are not necessarily looking at what we're looking at. So as part of their performances, they do have to sell those scenes. They may not even see them until actually the premiere themselves.
The great thing about this redesign of the Enterprise, which I think is magnificent, is that when it was going to be a television series, and the idea was it was years later, and the Enterprise was going to be refit, Matt Jeffries was actually working on the Paramount lot on Little House on the Prairie.
Yes, but Michael Landon allowed him to become a tech consultant to Star Trek.
And so Gene came to him and said, "How would you like to upgrade the Enterprise?" And he basically created the basic outline of this upgrade with the flattened nacelles and the
swept back
struts.
struts. Yeah.
Right. And a model was made, or partially made, for the television series. And when it was decided to turn it into a movie, they realized there wasn't
Not enough
the model,
detail.
There wasn't enough detail because television doesn't have the resolution of a huge screen. So they had to scrap that model or not complete it and create this magnificent one. And now, how many people contributed to the design? Andy Probert, I know.
Quite a few. Richard Taylor did the main overall redesign when it came to Abel's group, and of course Andy Probert contributed a lot to its final design, and various other designers at the Astra group, a Star Trek Robert Abel Corporation that they started for this show, and and then of course when Trumbull took over, they added the self-illumination fixtures on mainly the primary hull. But it's just such an outstanding leap from the TV to this.
But not
But still
jarring.
acceptable.
Not jarring at
Yeah,
all.
You still believed it
it's
was the
completely,
Enterprise.
Yeah, it's completely reasonable that this is the same ship. And a lot of people make snide comments of how long this takes, but you know what? This actually sets up the mood that you're actually in space, that
Yep.
this is actually real and happening. And in addition to the regular viewers who may not have as much baggage coming in to the show, but this is also to give the longtime fans a look at this main character.
Yeah.
And the composer Jerry Goldsmith referred to that he was writing a piece of music for a character, and he was writing it for the Enterprise, and definitely got the feeling that he felt in a way the composer finally had a chance to do something with a long sequence that wasn't broken up by action or dialogue, and he rather enjoyed his moment in the sun.
Yeah, and as such, this is one of the greatest music cues in film music of all time.
Yep.
And it's a payoff to the fans who waited 10 years to see this beautiful ship on the screen.
And in fact, this is a rewrite of an earlier cue that he had written and was thrown out because it, quote, didn't have a theme in it. But the original cue fits just as well, and it just isn't as finished. But yeah, this is really marvelous. And look at the shuttle bay there. Look at that.
Yeah.
And Mike, those windows on the right there, you mentioned you knew where that was in the ship, and I said, how in the world did you know that? And you said, that you were in Gene's office and he had a model of the ship on his desk and there was an arrow that pointed to the rec deck?
Oh, right. Yeah, I just happened to be visiting Gene's office, and he and Robert Wise must have been figuring out where the recreation deck is, and right about now you can start to see the
Here it
window.
comes, there it is.
Yeah.
Oh, there it would have been.
Yeah.
And this is actually a larger model of the dry dock, quite a bit more detailed than the main model. And of course, a larger model of the hull.
And there's a guy looking out the porthole
Oh,
just
right.
to
Yes.
make sure that everything works fine.
I hope he stepped out of the way when the door opened.
Was it in the novelization it was suggested that Kirk had started a tradition now that captains approaching their ship do it by shuttle instead of
I like
beaming?
that. I like that.
I'd sure want to.
And a set we never saw in the television series.
Permission to come aboard, sir.
Granted, sir. Welcome aboard, Admiral. Commander Scott, you're needed in engineering immediately.
Now, the things they're wearing as belt buckles, those are medical scanners?
Yeah, they were supposed to be. It was never explained, but yeah.
Because it seemed like then somehow that helped create the idea that in the Next Generation television series that the...
Hold on the back wall, you see a little white dot which represents the turbolift. Now you will just see it move for a moment,
Oh, yes.
and then of course the actor stands in front of the graphic. But it was a little dot on the diagram showing how the turbolift was traveling through the ship.
And isn't this the first scene that was filmed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Day one.
Yep.
This is
August 7th.
August 7th. Isn't that something?
1978, yeah.
Beautiful shot. And a great bridge. And the color scheme is different from what they planned for Phase 2, but the consoles, which I believe are Mike Miner design, they
Yeah, Mike
survived.
Miner and Lee Cole.
Lee Cole doing the graphics for the
Yes.
controls and things.
You can see the white. You missed it, but it's there. It's on the bridge.
I wish the circumstances were less critical. Epsilon 9 is monitoring the intruder. Keep a channel open.
I see.
Where's Captain Decker?
He's in engineering, sir. He doesn't know.
Doesn't know about what? Oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
Assemble a crew on the recreation deck at 0400 hours.
I think the idea behind the design of those chairs with sort of the skeletal structure is they provided massage.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Now, this corridor, it stayed in use on the Enterprise D, didn't it? Right through to Generations?
Pretty much. Although that particular corridor was modified, but the basic structure stayed.
It's
Yeah.
a great shot.
That
Yeah.
shot, too, we saw beautiful drawings by Mike Miner.
There's a wonderful perspective painting on the floor, which the set itself was three stories high, but the painting on the floor makes it look much bigger.
Now, and this actual set, was it recycled into the D with the transparent floor and this little elevator?
Yeah.
It was in there. It didn't resurface until Voyager, I think. The actual same layout was in Voyager.
The basic layout stayed for Next Generation and Voyager. The elevator was moved at some point.
I love the fact that the forced perspective, the engineers back there are kids. And if you watch their body language, you can tell if they're kids.
Let's talk.
Let's not.
Let me know when that backup's ready. All due respect, sir,
And what's interesting in the evolution of Star Trek is that Commander Decker, his basic character became Will Riker, just as Ilea became Troy.
Executive officer. Temporary grade reduction to commander.
And in the television series, Zahn was clearly a forerunner of Data, because he was a Vulcan who had no human emotions, but realized he would have to understand them in order to work with a human crew.
5 years out there dealing with unknowns like this. My familiarity with the Enterprise.
Half of that corridor behind Kirk is actually a perspective painting, and if you look at it, if you watch the vanishing lines, they don't actually line up. They line up perfectly in the first shot, but not here in
And
the
the
coverage.
poor extras either have to turn or
Yes, before they
before they
walk
go
into
down
the
the
wall.
rest of the half.
Now, if you look at the Kimball painting of the ship, you actually realize that corridor theoretically leads outside the ship into space.
Well, that's why it's warped.
I knew that.
It's interesting how much Stephen Collins reminds me of Keir Dullea from
Isn't
from
that-
2001.
That's right.
But I only remembered this because the doll, this 12-inch doll that Mego released, looks exactly like Keir Dullea.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that's why the aftermarket Keir Dullea action figures come from.
Correct. Oh, here come the gerbil cages. Oh, Cleary, what have you done now?
I told you not to push that button.
Do not engage. It's too late. Beaming now.
See, McCoy was right. Never get in the transporter.
I think this was explained to us early on when we started writing Star Trek novels, that the key to a good Star Trek story is figuring out a new way to break the transporter and the
Disable
communicator.
it.
Right.
Immediately.
This was pretty gruesome. This was actually rated G when it came out,
Right.
and then in
Now
DVDs
PG.
it's PG.
Yes.
We need more signal. More signal.
They're losing their pattern.
Oh no, they're forming.
I remember reading the novel and reading this scene in particular. It was horrifying.
Yeah.
Now, the novel makes clear that these are, one of these guys is Sonak, and the other one is Lori
Lori
Kiana.
Kiani, yeah, I think.
So
Who-
that was the science officer
Who was
and
ostensibly
navigator.
who was ostensibly Kirk's wife.
Yeah, exactly.
Starfleet, do you have them? Enterprise.
And of course, this is Janice Rand's return to Star Trek. She had been in the first half of the first season and then mysteriously vanished off the Enterprise.
The voice from Starfleet is Todd Ramsey, who was the editor of the film.
Please express my condolences to their families. Commander Sonax can be reached through the Vulcan embassy. There was nothing you could have done, Rand. It wasn't your fault.
How does that transporter chamber fit into the history of Star Trek? Because we know the lenses from the original series transporter ended up on other sets. Was that a brand new set?
Except for the lenses, supposedly, yeah. Although one day during, I think Voyager, I happened to be working in the catwalks above the set, and I was looking at those lenses. 5 of them looked yellowed and chipped, so I believe that they were from the original series. One of them looked a lot newer.
Very form-fitting uniforms.
I was just about to say. Or not.
No.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to go to craft service too many times when you're wearing those uniforms.
That's interesting. So Kirk's insignia appears to be metal, and everybody else's is stitched on.
He's the
fabric?
captain.
He's the okay. He's,
Captain
the
Kirk.
admiral.
He's the admiral.
Well,
That's
he's
Admiral
still
Crunch.
the captain.
Admiral Kirk.
Oh, goody, here we
All
go.
right.
That's all we know about it. Except that it is now 53.4 hours away from Earth. Enterprise is the only Federation starship that stands in its way. We assume that there is a vessel of some type at the heart of the cloud. Our orders are to intercept, investigate, and take whatever action is necessary and possible. We can only hope that there is a life form aboard that vessel that reasons the way we do.
Bridge to Captain. Priority signal from Epsilon 9.
Put it on viewer.
On viewer, sir.
Enterprise. The cloud is definitely a power field of some kind. Measures, my God, over 82 AUs in diameter. Must be something incredible inside there generating it. We're transmitting lingo code friendship messages on all frequencies. No response. I have a null reading at the center of the cloud.
Definitely something inside there, but all scans are being reflected back.
Some kind of power surge.
Receiving an odd pattern now.
Enterprise, they could be mistaking our scans as a hostile act.
Seem to be reacting to our scans.
Deflect as emergency
And
fire.
Bijo, of course, is the one who sort of led the campaign to have the very first flight test space shuttle named
Yes.
not Constitution but Enterprise. And it was at the time that the announcement was made that that first shuttle would be called Enterprise that Paramount also announced the great new Star Trek movie, Planet of Titans.
Yeah. I thought it was really wonderful of Gene Roddenberry to try to include the fans who had been waiting so long
Yeah.
for this to happen. I thought that was very nice. And I remember when we were done shooting for the day, I had struck up a friendship with one of the crew people, and he said, "Hey, you want to walk around the sets?" And I said, "Sure." So I got to go walk around the corridors and got a little bit of a preview of what the Enterprise was going to look like.
On the 20th anniversary of the picture, Robert Weiss had a screening at, I think it was the Directors Guild.
Yes.
And someone invited us. It might have been you, Darren.
It might have been.
Invited us there. And it was a very small screening, just, I don't know, maybe a couple of dozen people.
Viewer off. Pre-launch countdown will commence in 40 minutes.
And we bid a fond farewell to the Epsilon 9 station, but we will see it again in Star Trek III, up on the wall in one of the bars at Starfleet.
Photon torpedo load status.
Transporter system fully repaired and functioning normally.
And another costume change.
Clear, Captain. Reply, we are holding position awaiting final crew replacements.
Aye, sir.
Transporter personnel reports the navigator, Lieutenant.
For Phase 2, they managed to hire everyone back except Leonard Nimoy, and so that's why Spock was going to be off on assignment someplace, and Zahn was going to come on as the new science officer. But they weren't sure if they could continue to afford William Shatner and the other cast members, but particularly Shatner, after the first 13 episodes. So they wanted to have Decker in the wings as the new captain, possibly.
And then you too, Lieutenant.
My oath of celibacy is.
And was Persis Khambatta actually cast for Phase 2, or did she come in only for motion picture?
She was cast for Phase 2.
Yes, and we saw, when we were doing Art of Star Trek, we saw wonderful film footage of her going through makeup tests.
With a bald cap.
With a bald cap.
And
they had to shave that head. She got a 5 o'clock shadow on her head constantly. They said it was quite something just to keep her head fully depilated for each day.
Didn't they shoot actual tests in the engine room and so forth, and the characters were in original series uniforms for
yes,
that? Yes, yeah.
Bill Tice pulled them out of storage,
right.
And so they did lighting tests and that. But that was one of the intriguing things about. Now here's an interesting thing.
Admiral Nagul invoked a little-known, seldom-used reserve activation clause. In simpler language, Captain, they drafted me.
They didn't.
This was your idea. This was your idea, wasn't it?
Bones is a thing out there.
Why is any object we don't understand always called a thing?
Headed this way. I need you. Damn it, Bones. I need you. Badly.
Permission to come aboard?
Permission granted, sir.
Well, Jim, I hear Chapel's an MD now. Well, I'm going to need a top nurse, not a doctor who'll argue every little diagnosis with me. And they probably redesigned the whole sick bay, too. I know engineers, they love to change things.
Darren, tell us a little bit about what went into those amazing dry dock scenes.
Well, the dry dock itself was shot in front of what's called a front-light backlight process, meaning it's not blue screen, but they would shoot one pass with a brightly lit background and no lights on the foreground, and then they would do the same pass with the models lit correctly. And the bright pass would serve as a mat to insert stars or the Earth behind it. And in this way, they could much more carefully craft the lighting on the miniatures rather than have to worry about eliminating blue from the blue screens. So this allowed them to get some amazing shots with a snorkel camera and tiny little mirrors bouncing light onto the Enterprise itself. Those little round spots are basically bounced from dental mirrors at the base of the ship.
So they didn't actually come from the lights on the ship?
No, in fact, almost never. The only exception I would say are those on the neck there. You can see the glint of the up pointing light, and the ones that are aiming at the engine support pylons.
That's just a beautiful model.
But we get a great look at this amazing paint job.
Oh, it
on
is.
this
It's
ship.
beautiful.
Dozens of various hues of pearlescent paint done over the course of months and months of painting. And it was actually started when Magicam was building the original model, and then it was kept on throughout the addition of the external lighting when Trumbull took over.
There's an interesting design note here, too, because in 2001, the wonderful Discovery model was just covered with intricate detail and pieces, and Star Wars, of course, had that same look. But the Enterprise remained smooth skin, and I remember that goes back to Matt Jeffries saying that he never liked to see all that extraneous detail on the outside of a spaceship because space was such an unforgiving environment. It was far safer to do all your repairs from inside. So he always wanted a smooth skin spacecraft. Here's an interesting story point coming up. In the original 2-hour pilot draft, the Enterprise goes to warp, and all of a sudden there's an asteroid in front of it, and it, for several pages, is hurtling towards destruction and apparently can't be turned away. It was a very weak part of the script, and it was suggested, well, how about a wormhole? And the Paramount executives, they were quite confused by a wormhole and where did this concept come from when they saw it in the script. And Gene suggested, well, why don't you send the script to Isaac Asimov and he'll comment on it. And Isaac, of course,
was Gene's friend.
Was Gene's friend and had contributed the idea. So he wrote a report back saying, oh yeah, all the science in this is worthy, and the Paramount execs were very relieved.
Speaking of science, those shots we just saw of Jupiter, those were painted very shortly after the first Voyager flybys of Jupiter. So at the time, those were probably the most accurate models of Jupiter in existence.
Accelerating to warp 7 on leaving the solar system will bring us to IP with the intruder in 20.1 hours.
Science officer's computation confirmed, sir.
Wasn't Persis Kambata a former Miss India?
Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Was it 68? I think. I don't know.
All balls to the new medical.
The great D. Kelly.
One of the ways you can tell this is a motion picture is the number of bridge stations that have crew. Because that's something I know in the design of bridges for the television series, you want to cut that down so you don't have to have extras day after day, week after week.
Yes, but you should give them chairs. Can you imagine standing like that at your station for hours and hours? I can't.
Don't they turn down the gravity?
Yeah.
Even on TNG, Denise Crosby and Michael Dorn used to complain that they had to stand up.
That's it, sir. I can't do any better. Aye, lad.
This is my favorite scene in the picture. I happened to be visiting that day, and I saw Scotty say this.
It's so Scotty.
I had warp 1, Mr. Sulu. Accelerating to warp 1, sir.
I don't know about you guys, but having that joystick right there on the helm console just makes me nervous. What if somebody, like,
Just
jostled forward or sat down on it or something like that? Whoops, sorry about that.
Mr. Decker.
We've now entered the wormhole, which is basically a tour de force of animation effects.
How exactly was that strobing, the trailing, done? I've heard that it's pretty much a hand animation technique.
It pretty much is, basically establishing the points that are supposed to streak, and then on an animation stand taking each frame of film and exposing it in perspective and changing the perspective around.
Oh my gosh.
It's just unbelievable amount of work, let alone the generation of the wormhole itself, which is basically a time exposure of a laser basically sketching out an outline on a piece of paper as the camera pulls back, and it basically for each frame, the hours and hours and hours of camera time to even generate this. It's just mind-boggling.
I think
these interior streaks, that as far as I know is the last major sequence that was actually finished by Robert Abel and Associates.
Now, I've heard various different stories about that because Robert Swarth, who was the animation effects supervisor, handled all of this, and Swarth actually worked for Trumbull. So I don't know exactly the background of there, but I do know that this was in the Show West footage that they showed beforehand. And so it leads me to believe that this was finished before a bunch of the other shots were, but I have no basis for that.
We have heard, though, that because of the complexity of shooting this live action and then slow motion, that this one scene took something like 3 weeks of stage time to complete.
Because it had to be shot, I think, 3 times. On the 65 millimeter cameras and on the regular 35 millimeter cameras, just in case.
Just in case.
little much jiggling there.
Yeah.
The conclusion of this scene was obviously put together hastily for the theatrical release, and it's one of the things that we addressed in the director's edition.
That diagram behind Decker's head is actually the Enterprise from Star Trek Phase 2.
Yeah, and and the one in the Turbolift as well, I think.
Position report, Navigator.
Computing new intersection course.
Communications are normal, sir.
Negative damage reported.
Now, this is the only time we've actually seen safety restraints on the Enterprise. Those arms folding down. Is that?
Yeah.
I remember they made a big deal about telling everybody about that, just to make sure that, we weren't having people thrown around the bridge willy-nilly.
But actually, when I visited the set, I sat in there and I folded the arms down. They actually wouldn't hold you down. But it's a good idea.
That object is less than 2 days away from Earth. We need to intercept while it still is out there. Navigator.
Now, the screens on the consoles, they're a combination of backlit panels, CRTs, and...
I think for this, they weren't CRTs. They were actual film projectors.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
The vast majority of them are actual 8mm film loops.
Oh, my goodness.
Level 5.
that I think were later transferred, or some of them were transferred to video, were they not?
They were transferred for video, but only for Star Trek II.
Ah. Obviously, Kirk has an enjoyment of the Partridge Family.
I got it.
Now, this scene with Decker, Kirk, and McCoy is in the original 2-hour pilot by Harold Livingston. Though here they're in the original, they're talking about, oh, why couldn't we steer the Enterprise away from that asteroid?
Sir, you haven't logged a single star hour in 2.5 years. That plus your unfamiliarity with the ship's redesign, in my opinion, sir, seriously jeopardizes this mission.
Now, when they started Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the sets had basically been built, but they underwent a major redesign. They redid all of the instrumentation, and they added a lot of detail. But every once in a while, you can see pieces of the original on the back wall behind, right there, that console. Look at the controls on it. That gives you an idea of the style that they were envisioning for Star Trek Phase 2.
It's a much broader palette of colors that were going to be done.
And that came from Michael Miner's concept paintings.
Here we have a portion of the corridor set redressed with upholstery, just to give the living areas a more homey look.
It's fascinating for set construction. When we were going through all the files that John Povil had kept, we were trying to find when the decision was made to change Phase 2 from a television series to a feature. And one of our first clues was we started reading the set reports and the miniature reports, and everything was falling behind schedule, and nobody was being fired, and nobody at the top was writing back memos saying, what the heck is going on?
Which is very unlikely.
And we finally talked to Bob Goodwin, who explained that the decision to make this a movie was made something like just over a month after it was announced as a television series. But I guess the news finally leaked around December that they were actually going ahead with a motion picture.
An obsession that can blind you to far more immediate and critical responsibilities. Your reaction to Decker is an example, Jim.
Bridge to Captain.
Viewer on.
Signal from a Federation-registered long-range shuttle, sir. She wishes to come alongside and lock on.
For what purpose?
My security scan shows it has a grade 1.
If you look on the far right of the screen, there's like a little doorway. You never see it in any of the movies. There's actually a little breakfast nook there, a little round table and a little couch.
Your opinion has been noted. Anything further?
That depends on you.
It's interesting the costume design shows a little more of a free spirit with McCoy.
Yes.
The open collar.
With the chest hair.
With the chest hair.
I love this right here where the door closes. It's just a comment on the character that Kirk really is alone, no matter who he can confide in and so forth. He's the captain, and he's really alone.
It's interesting. We once took a tour of the Pentagon into what was going to be the new command center for the Air Force there.
Which they referred to as the Star Trek room.
And it honestly looked like a Herman Zimmerman design, with the consoles were rounded, pastel colors, but they had glass walls so that the commanders higher up the food chain could stand back, see what everybody else was doing, but they had their security barrier.
But if you're familiar with Star Trek sets, it was very familiar indeed.
Here we have the famous half gainer.
Yes.
Wonderful move.
This is a great move.
Where was the model being supported?
I believe that it was right facing away from us.
Yes.
Basically on a pole. And,
great gearing.
It's just so it's well choreographed.
Yeah. There's one of the football players.
I was going to say, it just reminds me of a 1920s football player.
Now, this is theoretically right behind the bridge. So how did Spock get from here to the bridge via turbolift?
Details.
Well, you got to get into a turbolift to come out of a turbolift. Maybe it just turns around.
Okay, I'll buy that.
You know, it's a extra security.
Metal detector thing.
Why, it's Mr.
It's Mr.
And this was Spock, of course, or Leonard Nimoy wasn't going to be in Phase 2, and so In Thy Image was written with Zahn all the way through. And when Robert Wise took over, he was, I think, told by his wife that, well, you can't possibly have Star Trek without Spock.
I've been monitoring your communications with Starfleet Command, Captain. I'm aware of your engine design difficulties. I offer my services as science officer.
Those glyphs on Spock's robe were designed by Bob Fletcher, who was the costume designer. We went through some of his notes, and we found, and according to Fletcher, those symbols literally translate as concept, discipline, process, or he figuratively translates it as branches entwined form the tree. Don't ask me.
Oh, isn't that lovely?
Isn't that lovely? It is.
I guess there was a whole series of Vulcan robes with various sayings like that. No, there wasn't.
This and that and...
Well,
I think it was sponsored by Burma Shave.
I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about.
Captain, with your permission, I will now discuss these fuel equations with the engineer.
Look, this is fascinating. Look, the two focus.
Yeah.
That's called a split diopter, which is basically a piece of glass, a piece of glass that is basically half of it is a lens, half of it is clear, and it allows to split the focus level of different shots, and which is necessary because of the small amount of focal length in a low light environment, such as the bridge.
Which was driven by the intensity of the projectors.
Correct.
And we just heard a snippet of the original series music, which was very nice.
I think Jerry Goldsmith talked about that and said from then on they always used a little in every movie.
And Jerry Goldsmith actually brought in Alexander Courage to do these cues that featured his music.
Oh no, it just blew up.
Apparently, generating that warp effect was so difficult and took so long that they never wanted to attempt it again. Because, in my opinion, it hasn't looked as good since.
Now, did they actually streak the model, or did they streak art?
They streaked the model.
Really?
Yeah. I love this little wink by Kirk. Look at that. That really was a Robert Wise moment, because I remember him basically looking at us like that when we were working on the director's edition, and he sort of had a little playfulness that I think that Kirk shot came through with, and that's what I'm always reminded when I see that.
Robert Wise, of course, great director, but also two tremendous science fiction films before this, Day the Earth Stood Still, the original, and The Andromeda Strain.
At last report, you were on Vulcan.
And here's this officer's lounge, which was sort of, from what I was able to gather, was sort of thrown together because it had to be. There were a lot of concepts to sort of open this scene up and show the exterior of the ship that never really happened. So they basically were able to grab some windows from another set and put it behind this, and it doesn't really line up to anything on the exterior of the ship.
I doubt that
unfortunately.
Furniture would be very comfortable.
I was just gonna
gathered it
say
was
the
boxes.
furniture,
Yeah,
that were
boxes
upholstered.
covered with very thin material, apparently.
There's
look like they came from the wreck deck.
And there's a great Andy Probert concept painting of this scene, multi-level, looking out the back of the ship. It was tremendous.
I've always loved that, and you know, when we were working on the director's edition, I thought of any way that we could take this and isolate the characters and basically put them in a digital version of that. There was no way.
Today.
Yet.
Give me a moment.
I need him. Then my presence is to our mutual advantage.
And we see that the characters actually do have a definite arc in this movie. at the beginning of the film, they're all out of their element. They're all unsure of themselves. They're all in different roles than we're used to. And through the course of the film, they all make journeys to return to their level state, their happiness state. And Spock is just beginning to, we see that he's totally different. He's totally cold to everybody. And
I'd agree. I'd say there's a degree of discomfort in all of them in their relations with each other, and they're having to readjust to one another and come back. After a long marriage, they've been separated, and now they've come back together.
In the original Harold Livingston pilot draft and taking it from the God thing, McCoy had not only resigned from Starfleet, he had resigned from human medicine, and he had become a vet. And there was a scene where he was, I think, treating a wildcat that had been tamed in a park when Kirk came up to him and said, "I need you back."
Standard line, engineer. Full mag on viewer. Full mag, sir.
one of many reaction shots that we will see. We used to joke that that's the behind Uhura is a fast food logo.
That's funny. You're talking about the communications department logo.
Yes, yes.
That's actually what I called it too.
Mike, when we look at those consoles, how much of that is planned from the very beginning, and how much just grows as they decide they need more detail?
The basic consoles were, of course, made for Phase 2, but when they started doing Star Trek: The Motion Picture, Mike Miner, Lee Cole, and Rick Sternbach basically came in and redid everything. When I started at Star Trek 4, I actually dug around under the sets and looked around, and it was like archaeology. You could find the original slot gags, original devices that they were planning to use for the to make the readouts work, and they basically built on top of it, or they just took the pieces and they just discarded them. But the overall sense of the bridge is very similar. Right behind Kirk is Chekhov's station, which originally was a big bubble, some kind of a targeting device. I'd be interested to hear if they ever actually made that work.
5 minutes to cloud boundary.
Navigator, lay in a conic section flight path to cloud.
And if you watch the film as it goes on, the readouts gradually change. When they started the film, they had a bunch of things that Mike Miner and Lee Cole had done, mostly with cells. And as the feature film went on, as they filmed more and more, they were asked to come up with more material.
That measures 12 power energy. Thousands of starships couldn't generate that much. Mr. Spock?
I know in other television series, spin-offs of Trek, the original one, the actors were much more comfortable when they were given actual working buttons or something that they could focus on the console, so it wasn't a solid state. And certainly get that feeling here. It feels like a hands-on console.
Well, at Lee and Mike and Rick put together something an actual booklet showing theoretically what the buttons did.
Ah.
And it was an imposing document. It was an amazing document. The problem, of course, is that you can't always predict where the director is going to need you to lean over to push a button at this moment.
And here's one of the instances where the editorial department took care of a lot of, or tried to take care of a lot of problems that arose when the visual effects simply weren't there. And they basically took this scene and rearranged it several times over the course of getting it ready, and just trying to get the available effects shots to work with the footage that had been shot. And it really came down to it, and they had to make a lot of cuts that don't necessarily make a lot of sense if you're paying attention. I remember reading in Walter Koenig's book, he went on and on about having to do this and basically that his main job was screaming, and that he started to relish that. And then when he saw that they cut a lot of it out, he was very disappointed that he'd, ramped himself up to get all upset about being attacked, and then it was gone. Thank you.
Yeah, but he got to scream again in Star Trek II.
This is true.
Previous transmission mode.
There's the communications logo.
I'm now programming our computers.
And that apparently is Romper Room behind Spock.
Star Trek: The Motion Picture reminds me so much of the original series episode Changeling.
Sure.
You've got this entity, and then it's seeking its creator, and you transmit your information, and all of a sudden it stops.
It's surprising how that idea came from. I guess the script was written by John Meredith Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Gene was going to make, after Star Trek, before Phase 2, he got a pilot made for Genesis 2 about Dylan Hunt, familiar name, a NASA engineer who took part in a hibernation experiment and in the Carlsbad Caverns. And there was a cave-in, and instead of being in hibernation for a couple of days or a week or so, he was in hibernation for about 300 years. He woke up in a post-apocalyptic world and with a group of people who were descendants of the NASA engineers who then were trying to restore technological civilization to Earth. And one of the ideas, or one of the episodes that was in the original Bible was called Robots Return. And the idea was that a NASA mission in 1992 had left a bunch of complex equipment on a moon of Jupiter. It had evolved into an intelligent life, came back looking for its creator, and found Dylan Hunt as a NASA engineer. And because he was part of NASA, the robot decided that Dylan was the Messiah.
In that story, instead of V'ger, it was Nsa.
20 hours away from Earth. We know nothing about it as yet.
Precisely the point, Captain. We don't know what it'll do. Moving into that cloud at this time is an unwarranted gamble.
Alan Dean Foster wrote the outline for In Thy Image, and that was where the probe was coming back for INSA, and that's what got turned into the pilot episode written by Harold Livingston.
Of course, one of the derisive titles given to Star Trek: The Motion Picture by people who aren't exactly thrilled with it is Where Nomad Has Gone Before. And
okay.
I think that was very unfair because I like the story. And a good story is worth telling again.
That's right.
And of course, Kirk's chair is excited about what's to come.
Now, they gave the size of the cloud earlier on as 82 AU, astronomical units.
Yes.
And what, so on the scale of the solar system, that's
about the size of the orbit of Neptune.
Yeah, and AU is, of course, the measure of the distance between the Earth and the Sun at any given point. 93
million miles.
Yeah, and for the director's edition, we chopped that up a little bit and made it 2 AUs, which is a little more believable, if not...
it's still pretty darn big.
It's still darn big. And this is why it takes 20 minutes to get through it.
Well, if they were in the carpool lane.
But this is again Trumbull's group, Entertainment Effects Group, doing these effects, and most of these are done on a 2D animation stand, but with 3D camera movements, meaning multiple exposures on artwork, basically moving through on a set path, and multiple exposures and making basically a tube of flat images. And this is basically an extension of the work that was done in 2001 with the slit scan method for making 3D images out of 2D art.
And not a lick of computer animation in any of this.
It's just truly amazing. And we forget.
I suspect the cameras are probably
The cameras are controlled by computer, but they all exist in the artwork exists in the real world and is photographed.
And of course, Persis Khambatta has absolutely no idea what she's looking at. Just is really cool.
So each frame of here is the camera moving from as close as possible to the art all the way back. So the camera has to repeat that move every single frame.
Basically, yeah.
Except that it's the starting and ending points are slightly different.
Right. I have no idea what is happening out the window. And it's interesting that the on-set lighting is green.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at one point they had images that would align with this, but of course by this time the first company doing the effects had been removed and Trumbull's group had been brought in, and so they had to do what they had to do in a short space of, I think it was 8 months, complete all of the effects.
Well, the effects eventually became the driving force of the picture. Just the crunch to meet this really ambitious film in such a short time.
The cut of the film had to allow for effect shots that hadn't been delivered, and so they allowed sections in blank leader to pop in the effects when they finally arrived. And as such, basically the last effects came in just a couple weeks before the film actually was released, and so it was down to the wire, and they had no time to do a fine cut of the picture or to do previews.
And that's what Robert Wise said. He'd never done that.
Mm-hmm. Never
that was
before.
The only film that he had no test preview on. So he said they had cut scenes with dialogue, allowing for the test or for the special effects, and that in hindsight, of course, would have given them a chance to perhaps cut some of these longer scenes.
And speaking of blank film, the financial pressure on this film was enormous because it carried the costs of all the earlier attempts to produce the show as a series or as a television show.
Transmit image of alien to Starfleet. Advise we are attempting further communication.
Unable to make contact with Starfleet, Captain. Any attempt to transmit out of the cloud is being reflected back.
Speaking of the first screening that I was attended at the Chinese, 3 reels arrived, and the 4th apparently arrived when the movie was already being screened.
Wow.
So that's not an exaggeration.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, what was it? The second Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back.
Yes.
That was completed 2 weeks after it was released.
Yeah.
They changed the last reel
back.
to add an extra shot.
Were there any shots that didn't make it into this picture?
I don't think so.
The matte shot of Kirk coming out of the Enterprise.
Well, yeah, but that was from a section that was actually removed from the film, because he was wearing a completely different spacesuit.
Is it not in this cut?
No,
I don't think so.
It's in the
It's in the ABC version.
ABC version,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Now here, of course, is the exterior of V'ger, which was shot by John Dykstra's group, Apogee. And this is the transition after the cloud sequence.
So V'ger theoretically flies by, takes a picture of the system or the creature or the whatever these things are, but the question is, did V'ger assimilate them and therefore destroy them? And if that's the case, did V'ger destroy its home planet?
That's a good question. I think it should be answered by someone other than I.
Well, in The Return, which was the second novel we wrote with William Shatner about how Kirk didn't actually die in Generations, but came back into the era of Jean-Luc Picard, the Borg featured in that story. And when the Borg went to assimilate Spock in the story, they stopped because they realized, oh, he's already part of the collective. And that was explained because Spock had melded with V'ger, and we suggested that this machine planet was actually the Borg homeworld. And because it was the Borg, that went all the way up to Rick Berman, and all he asked us to do in that was, well, don't destroy the whole machine world at the end.
Please.
Leave some of it so that the Borg can continue. So that was our explanation.
That's what we did.
I like it. It's good.
The process of building the V'ger miniature was so arduous and painstaking that they only had half of it finished before they had to start shooting it. So it was shots like that previous one where they had half of it basically, and the other half was a projection of the previous shot. It's just they were building and shooting and building and shooting, constantly trying to keep up with each other.
Now there's a depth of field problem where it actually looked like a miniature.
Yeah.
500 meters. It's because they're only 500 meters away.
Right. Some amazing motion control laser work there down in the pit. And it's interesting, Sid Mead was talking about designing the exterior of V'ger and how he was coming up with basically visual cues for scale for things that we don't really understand, in that he puts in shapes of things that we recognize, like cathedrals or canyons, basically, so that we can assume that they're one size, and but using the trappings of this alien artifact as the structure, but leaving in things that we are familiar with their size, so that we'll know that this is in fact huge.
Now, there was a decision made, or I don't know if it was a deliberate decision, never to show V'ger in its entirety, but instead we're only seeing like 1/6 of V'ger as we're going up one of the valleys.
I think that was we were going to see the Enterprise in these shots. This was storyboarded to feature, at least in a few of them, the Enterprise in the shots, but later Doug Trumbull wanted to basically keep his idea of first-person cinema, so that these things are actually happening to us rather than us being third-party participants.
And I love the fact this was fjords, just the way fjords and ice on them, because that made it much.
And that shot, again, right out of the original script, the little white smudge against the enormity of V'ger.
I'm not sure what the significance of the Voyager balls, as they referred to them.
Sea urchins.
Well, it just looks very
just
organic.
Like some sort of form of brain.
At one point,
of it.
At one point, those I think were the weapons.
Ah.
Oh, okay.
That V'ger discharges later, but I think that was thrown out in favor of something a little more obscure. And this is almost pixel for pixel, exactly like Sid Mead's painting.
Definitely get the scale there.
Yeah, I was going to say this is one big thing.
And it's funny because you spend the first part of the movie establishing the scale of the Enterprise and showing how large that is.
Yeah.
And then you show it dwarfed by this.
I find this whole thing fascinating. Their original intention, having a man behind that, and then that obviously didn't work.
And yet, that's the way it was shot.
Yep.
And so they had to do some serious finagling to make this sequence work.
Well, the original idea was, I think, quite brilliant. That is, normally when you have an animated light bulb thing on the set, it just looks pasted on. But here, they had this huge neon tube that cast this harsh light. So it would, so when you did the animation gag, it would tie in because you'd see all the shadows. But it just didn't work.
Well, and in the television version, these were actual mechanical probes, and one was just for listening, and one was just for touching, and one was just for looking, and they appeared all over the ship. And here's a beat that's right out of The Changeling.
Yeah.
V'ger
Yeah, there's just
pulling
so many
information.
similarities.
And Spock's next move, where he brings his hands together, that action is described in Harold Livingston's script from the beginning.
I think in one of these shots of the probe itself, you can see the technician's elbow sticking out
Yes.
from behind the...
But it's really,
It's really quick.
brief. It's like right around. Is it right around here?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Now, were they doing
It's really
skip
hard to
frames
see.
there, or they had just slowed the camera a bit to get that jerky?
There it is, right
Yep.
there.
Yes.
There it is. Step back and you can see it.
Don't drop the prop.
It's a very effective use of silence there. Like, oh my gosh, what the heck has just happened?
This is how I define unwarranted.
Right.
Finally got in the last word.
Activate auxiliary computer circuits through manual shuttle.
So that could have gone better.
And of course, now that Spock's here, Decker has no place to sit down.
Right.
There's that six-sided symmetry.
Ah. We'll put our seatbelts on.
Of course, that was one of the big breakthroughs in the ship design, that there were two turbolifts on the bridge.
Mm-hmm. So that people could evacuate quicker.
I still think they need a ladder. What happens if the power goes out?
Well, they do. Read the books. There's some panels you can kick out. But they had two turbolifts in the animated series, didn't they?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, they had a second door. It was never
second?
made clear where it went.
Yeah.
And I believe they also have a coil of rope.
Neutron rope.
And duct tape.
Here we go.
The former Mrs. Shatner. As the irascible Chief DeFalco.
Disengage engine navigation relays now.
Aye, sir.
Force field circuits E10 through 14 show ready for reactivation. Confirm, please.
Scotty drive system should be free now.
Someone tell Dr. McCoy what to do.
Oh, he just came on the bridge to remind us he's still on the ship.
Right.
Delay launching as long as possible. Our drone can't escape as long as we're held in their tractor.
Now, at this point, we're still seeing the apogee shots up until we get through the maw, and then once we're inside, we're back to Trumbull's group.
What model of the Enterprise? Did they construct something like 6 inches, or did they just get way back on the...
You know, I really don't know. I don't think they could get way back on that without, you know, a bunch of mirrors, but I'm pretty sure that it was just a small miniature, to be redundant.
How large was the ILM model?
Well, the Magicam model was a little over 8 feet. And I got to spend some quality time with it on the director's edition.
That's quite a nice shot.
How many layers of exposure would we be looking at there?
Well, probably at least 3 or 4. The lights themselves, I'm sure they would shoot separately. The beauty lighting on the ship, and of course the background. Now we're, of course, into Trumbull's group shooting the interior, which is very reticent of the miniature of the interior of the Close Encounters mothership, because they came off that project immediately onto this.
Bring us inside. Not to destroy us. They could have done that outside.
The haze effect to establish scale, that was something I remember from Close Encounters, and then seeing it here in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Was it used extensively before Close Encounters?
Well, I think a lot of pioneering stuff was done on that film, shooting miniatures and lights in smoke-filled rooms, but never to the extent that it was on that. And these geometric forms that would close and open were designed by a man called Ron Resch, who was, I forget what university he was from. Do you know, Mike? But, yeah, he came up with these amazing interchanging forms that could move and basically morph by just twisting them. And so they developed that for the openings of V'ger.
Those two close-ups of the control panels, by the way, the photic sonar and that little thing with the moving rings, those screens are actually nowhere on the set. Those are actually in a separate insert model, much higher detail than anywhere else on the set.
Were they ever seen again?
Only in those two shots.
Let's take a look. Full sensor scan, Mr. Spock.
Believe it or not, they were, again, one of the things that we found that was auctioned off at Christie's. So the good news is they are safe and sound in the home of some fan.
Oh, good.
And not in a
dumpster.
I know there's the immensity of what they're facing is part of why there's so little reaction to Ilea's loss, but Kirk got tears in his eyes for the loss of the first two people in the transporter. And suddenly, I know it's professionalism, but it still seemed odd when Ilea and Decker became the heart of the film.
Of course, at this point, they don't know if Ilea is dead or not.
But there did seem to be a loss of concern about her when then suddenly she becomes active again at the end. But in the center, it shows that sort of evolution of she hadn't actually been someone who was going to be lost originally, and there were other thoughts about Decker being the one who merged, and it seemed odd. There wasn't a real continuation of that arc of intensity for the character. No. You'd been pulling it through differently if you'd intended it from the beginning. Mm-hmm.
And of course, they were being handed pages, revisions. I mean, my heart goes out to those actors because they were being handed revisions constantly.
Yeah.
Mr. Decker, you have the con. Whatever it is. Hold position. White hot.
One reviewer was very cruel and said that whenever Persis Khambatta was not on the screen, it went into a black hole.
Oh, dear.
Well, that's a bit...
But that was someone who didn't know track.
I was going to say. Although I think Persis did a wonderful job. Really lovely job.
She definitely held the screen with presence.
And for all us busy people, here we have a shower that not only cleans you, but it also dresses you, as we'll see.
And modestly.
Yes.
A shower that maintains a G rating at all times.
That's right.
And again, the little telltale on her neck was something that we were going to see on the robotic probes that came aboard earlier instead of the light.
Jim, what's going on?
And interestingly enough, in the original drafts of the script, the probe was called Tasha.
Who is V'ger?
V'ger is that which programmed me.
And here we're back to the changeling.
Is V'ger the name of the captain of the alien vessel?
Jim, this is a mechanism.
A probe, Captain.
But it looks like Ilea.
No doubt a sensor transceiver combination, recording everything we say and do.
In the first script, Zahn, when he figures out that this is a mechanism, he goes off and disappears for a while, and he has the Enterprise's replicators produce mechanisms of himself so he can smuggle a bomb on board V'ger in a Zahn robot. And Roddenberry was horrified by this, and one of his notes he's saying, we can't give the crew of the Enterprise the capability of producing exact robotic duplicates of themselves because it will change everything.
Oh, welcome to the holodeck.
What does V'ger want with the Creator?
To join with him.
To join with the Creator.
If you look behind Kirk, the mirror that is featured later in the movie is here, just blacked out. There you go.
Yes.
V'ger is that which seeks the Creator.
And I believe in the novelization, they pointed out it was a mirror with a time delay, so that you could stand with your back to it and then turn around and see what the back of your uniform looked like.
That's a great idea.
Slow glass.
Yeah.
Now, were there any novels written about Ensign Perez, the security officer behind them? 'Cause I think that's an avenue that hasn't been explored yet.
A whole spin-off series.
The examination is a normal function.
You may proceed.
I love that look.
Micro miniature hydraulics.
I always thought this was really cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
Matching the light to the animation.
Yeah, exactly. And that table, did they use that table in Next Generation? Did they morph that table into something?
It is used in Next Generation. And if you look at that green layer, well, that's a Genesis effect, isn't
Right.
it? If you look at that green layer at the base of the table, after they converted this to Next Generation, we actually cut that green layer up and made isolinear chips out of it.
Oh.
I recognize that color.
Fascinating. Non-Decker unit.
Smart man.
That's why he's Spock.
Yeah.
And of course, this sickbay became the Klingon sickbay in Star Trek III.
It is locked.
Apparently 89 is the code to lock it. That's for all you fans to write down.
It is a program mechanism, Commander. Its body duplicates our navigator in precise.
So where would all these sets go between movies?
They stayed there.
They stayed there.
On stage?
On stage. It was the longest standing sets on stage 9 until they were torn down.
We've worked at Paramount. I can't comprehend that they would let a stage stand for 2 years between movies.
They were there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Locked in an alien
Split diopter again.
In fact, it was very interesting when we were striking engineering after Star Trek Voyager wrapped. They were taking apart the structure of the engine,
Right.
and they got down to where Star Trek Phase 2 engineering was. Michael rang up the art department and called me down. He goes, "You come down to engineering right now. You got to see this." And they had gone down as far as the skeleton structure from Phase 2. And it was really a creepy moment because it was history.
Wow.
Yeah.
That wall behind Spock with those little capsule-shaped things, the silver things, those are supposedly medical supply gizmos. And if you looked very carefully on it, it said medical supplies cytoplasm or something, incident Andromeda strain.
There's the Alexander Courage theme again.
Oh.
Remains our only means of contact with our captor.
I don't see the NX-01 in there anywhere.
But I see this really cool ring ship. I always wanted to know the story behind that.
Maybe that'll be in the new timeline in the new movie.
We figured Jonathan Archer did something so terrible that he was just written out of history. So,
This is one of the most boring games in the world, and we have it here on the Enterprise.
What types of recreation does the crew aboard your vessel enjoy?
The words recreation.
And of course, when the rec deck scene was shot with all the extras, none of the games were on the floor. It was all just,
The platforms weren't there either.
No.
Ilea enjoyed this game. She nearly always won.
When... Oh, I guess she probably played this game before, not necessarily on the Enterprise. Because she's been kind of busy since she came aboard.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is from Krypton.
now, Denise, when you say the sets remained, how many of the sets are like bridge, sickbay, engineering?
I know that the sets on stage 9
Stage
stayed
Yeah, basically
that
everything
way.
on 9.
On 9, not necessarily on 8, but on 9 remained.
Yeah, so things like the rec deck went,
Yeah. Well, this was, I think, think it was on stage 17. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was.
But the bridge, the corridors, sick bay, engine room, that was built for Phase 2. Then it's in 78, and it stayed up basically through 2001.
Gosh.
Enterprise would be unable to function.
Although the bridge came down, of course.
It got blown up a lot, as I recall.
Before carbon units can be patterned for data storage.
Data storage, that sounds bad.
Yeah.
When my examination is complete, all carbon units will be reduced to data patterns.
So let's just kind of stretch this thing.
Are the memory patterns of a certain carbon unit. If I can help you to revive those patterns.
There are a couple of shots here that were clearly blue screen shots that they just didn't put blue screen elements into them.
Out the window?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just black, yeah.
And you guys put them in for the director's edition.
And notice, too, when the Enterprise is inside V'ger, its deflector dish has gone from blue to sort of amber.
This is correct. In the original theatrical release, there is a couple shots where it's back to blue, but we changed those for this transfer, and so there's remnants of the director's edition in this transfer, because Mr. Wise supervised the color timing on this and had it changed back to amber the way it should be when the warp engines are powered down. And of course, that was never done in any of the other films again.
It just stayed blue.
Yeah, it just stayed blue because it was easier.
On Delta. Remember?
Ilea.
Why would I ever want to wear this thing?
Dr. Chapel.
It's interesting, there were 13 scripts written for Phase 2, all bought and paid for, and one of them, The Child, actually got turned into a Next Generation episode in season 2.
So did Devil's Due.
Devil's Due. And then another one just got turned into a fan episode, one written by Michael Reeves and then Mark Zickery.
Help us. Make direct contact with V'ger.
I cannot.
This creator.
I thought it was interesting that McCoy admonished Decker for saying, this is a mechanism, what are you doing? Well, that's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to bring up those very human emotions and make contact, so V'ger doesn't turn them all into data patterns.
In the novel, Decker's method for getting the probe to remember are quite different and will not be mentioned at this gathering.
Well, actually, I believe those came from a script memo from William Shatner, who suggested it would be Kirk who would take that tact with Ilea. But he did suggest that you would cut away from the scene at a tasteful moment.
Of course, and then come back to him putting his boots on.
Yes, but it is very Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah.
Warning. Your emergency evacuation.
I think that's funny. Warning!
Now, for the director's edition, we removed this section because you think that Spock
would know how to
would
fire
know
a
how
rocket.
Would know how to
operate this.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
the audience is smarter than that. They know that Spock knows what he's doing, and we don't need to know exactly how everything works at all times.
Also, if this is for emergency evacuation, why would you have a 10-minute countdown?
Exactly.
You have to time it very carefully, too. You don't want to get squished by that
Well,
thing.
this is odd because it's not a countdown. In this case, it's a count up.
Up,
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is odd.
It's decelerating.
Confirmed, sir. Lunar beacons indicate intruder on a course into Earth orbit.
Sir, airlock 4 has been opened. Thruster suit is reported missing.
Good security.
And I'm offended.
That's Spock.
That's Spock.
Seen this before, Darren?
Never. Never seen it before. No, wait. Phaser's on stun.
There's something, just thinking about seeing this again and again and again, obviously when this came out, it was a huge success worldwide. We did some number crunching, and for the movies, converted their costs and the world gross to $2,008, and Star Trek: The Motion Picture earned the equivalent of $414 million in 2008.
Very respectable.
Wow.
Very respectable. And one of the reasons is because there was so much visual information in this and so many wonderful scenes that fans went back to it again and again. Multiple viewings.
Here's Spock is having some second thoughts about what he's actually doing. And this, of course, is the sequence that was at one point called the Memory Wall sequence, which involved Kirk and Spock going into the belly of V'ger and discovering what they needed to discover. They started shooting it and then stopped because it really wasn't working. It was looking like two men on strings, basically. And it was Doug Trumbull, actually, who came aboard at that time and suggested this method of first-person storytelling, where we go on the journey alone with Spock and see this basically from his perspective, and brought in artist Bob McCall to visualize these views that Spock sees as he goes through the imaging sensors.
One of the great challenges in creating spacesuits for science fiction films is the reflection of the helmets. But in this case, you want the reflections. So it actually became rounded.
Because it's telling half the story for us.
Yeah.
I'm seeing images of planets, moons, stars,
clovers.
It could be a representation of V'ger's entire journey.
But again, did he destroy these?
Right.
I think he did.
Yeah, so do I.
I think it did.
Well, I think he destroyed it, but I don't think that these are the objects themselves.
They're the visualization of them.
But
yeah.
V'ger's process of capturing them destroys them.
Yes.
It's like having a Xerox machine that destroys your page when you put it in and gives you an exact copy.
I had a scanner that worked like
That's
that.
called a transporter.
Now here we're coming up on a sequence that if you go frame by frame, you can pick up a lot of really interesting things.
Now, the question, of course, is if this is his entire journey, Rita's entire journey, where's the Klingons? Where's Epsilon 9?
What are you, nuts?
Yeah, Spock, not a great idea.
Right there. And you can see Ilia and Epsilon 9
and Leonard Nimoy's dental work.
Yeah, well.
And you actually can also see the Klingons in there.
And it's good to know that some of these props are with fans, because we did hear that after these suits were used in The Wrath of Khan, Kirk's helmet was spotted in a dumpster at the Paramount lot.
Well, the thing that I've always been grateful that Paramount auctioned these things off and didn't just destroy them, I think they did a really wonderful thing in doing that, is that one of our favorite films, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and you think about Kubrick ordered all
everything
the sets,
destroyed.
everything destroyed, and it's just,
just criminal.
It's just horrible.
Didn't the centrifuge go on exhibit someplace?
And a couple of the uniforms
imagine.
survived, of course.
Now, this costume that Spock is wearing is supposedly a spacesuit undergarment. If you look carefully, you can actually see little tubing in it, as if it's a water-cooled undergarment, like a present-day spacesuit.
Of course, the the monitor above his bed is completely dark, which is kind
Not
of
a good
ominous.
sign.
Well, and that's how we get to see the communicator for the wrist communicator.
You can see the other
The other guy's alive.
life signs indicator are active.
I should have known.
The instrument that Dr. Chapel is carrying, is that something from the original series?
Mm-hmm. It's a smaller version of And I think the original was a pepper shaker way back when.
So, but this was made for the movie?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Refers to our ship as an entity.
I saw Beecher's planet. A planet populated by living machines.
Borg homeworld.
Beecher has knowledge that spans this universe. And yet, with all its
Now, the sick bay later became, in Star Trek III, it became the bar that Dr. McCoy tried to hire the pilot at. And then it was modified. It became the observation lounge and sick bay for Star Trek The Next Generation.
You can see those very distinctive curved partitions in between where the beds are.
No, not Spock. Captain Bones.
Continue, Spock.
Spock.
Those life sign monitors behind Spock, the ones that are unfortunately turned off, we actually kept those graphics in place throughout Next Generation. So Dr. Crusher's sickbay had the same readouts from Dr. McCoy.
Some things are timeless. It's interesting, we were talking about the arc of the characters here, so that Kirk and McCoy at the end of this movie are back to where they want to be. Mm-hmm. Spock actually changes because his long battle between his two halves is finished, is reconciled, and he becomes a different character for the movies.
Is this all that I am? Is there nothing more?
Yeah, for the character, it's huge, because he's been searching so long and he never got the answer.
Kirk here.
A faint signal from Starfleet, sir.
It says help.
It's been located on the outer monitors for the past 27 minutes. Cloud dissipating rapidly as it approaches.
Starfleet reports forward velocity is slowed to subwarp speed. We are 3 minutes from Earth orbit.
I'll be right there.
Fasten your seatbelts.
Whenever you see Uhura's carefully manicured hand, you're wondering where the nail salon is.
Oh, I wondered where the nail salon was on Vulcan when you saw the Vulcan piece. Just great nails.
That's right.
Sending a machine to Earth. Looking for its creator.
Just like Nomad.
It's nothing like Nomad. I don't know what you're talking about.
Mr. Chekhov, Commander Decker's present location.
They are in engineering, sir.
Our establishing shot of Earth as V'ger's cloud dissipates still in the theatrical version doesn't give us a real idea of the scale of things. But it works just fine. And we can see a little schematic of the six-sided V'ger hovering above Earth.
Which I didn't realize that was a schematic of V'ger until I came up to your office for Director's Edition.
Previously on Star Trek.
Spock. A simple binary code.
I wonder if anyone ever actually went and figured out what that punch tape means.
Radio.
I love these graphics.
In the 90s, I was co-host on a radio show called Talk Trek, and for about 6 years, and we used that clip to introduce the show with Spock saying radio.
Oh.
And here again, the effects shots were just cut in from beginning to end with no trimming at all because there was no time. And so basically they just popped them in.
Would that be created with artwork or an actual vector graphic?
Artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all shot backlit on an animation stand to give you the glow.
And then that's a two-dimensional painting?
Probably. I think, yeah, Earth here is two-dimension. I don't think they built one.
That Earth we just saw, I believe, was actually a dome, and they created the cloud shadows by literally sprinkling powder on the dome. But they use different techniques.
They're the same things that hit us. They are hundreds of times more powerful, Captain. From those positions, they could...
I always wondered what those blinky orange things were.
I always thought they were some sort of space bees.
Yeah, they're very distracting, actually. That's so cool.
Why? The Creator has not answered. The carbon unit infestation is to be removed from the Creator's planet.
Why?
And again, there's an echo of this in the voyage home as the probe comes and wants to talk to the whales, and the whales don't answer.
Maybe whales could have talked to V'ger too.
How do we know they didn't?
Well, because by this time
They're
they're
all
gone. At least in this timeline.
Captain.
What?
V'ger is a child. I suggest you treat her as such.
A child?
Yes, Captain, a child. Evolving, learning, searching. Instinctively needing.
Needing what? Spock, this child is about to wipe out every living thing on Earth. Now, what do you suggest we do? Spank it.
I love how Spock just ignores McCoy.
What else is new?
But like so many of us, it does not know what.
Which is Spock's story.
Yes.
So Kirk has been given all the information he needs to make a decision, and now he's figured it out.
The carbon units know why the Creator has not responded.
Disclose the information.
Not until V'ger
But he plays it in typical Kirk fashion, the quintessential poker player.
But he gets outbluffed.
I'm losing Starfleet. Interference from V'ger.
Kirk unit, disclose the information. Why has the Creator not responded?
No. Secure all stations.
Yeah, you better.
Clear the bridge.
Clear the bridge, Captain?
Why must my orders be?
Your child is having a tantrum.
Maybe they should all be sitting down and using their chair restraints at this point.
Yeah.
Except for the people who have no chairs.
And then what was the episode where it was a child?
Secure all stations.
Trelane.
Yeah, I was going to say Squire of Gothos, yeah.
Which actually harkens back to a Fantastic Four comic book. The idea of a powerful alien causing destruction turns out to be a child rescued by his parents. Stan Lee strikes.
There are only 12 stories in the world.
Yes.
Actually, we've heard that there's only one. Things are not what they seem.
Because V'ger's going to destroy all the carbon units on the third planet.
They have repressed the Creator.
The information will not be disclosed.
How many people can you fit in a turbolift?
Those turbolifts are pretty big.
All the orbiting devices.
I remember when we were going through some of the stuff from the motion picture, the insignias have colors behind them.
Yes.
I was noticing this, of course, trying to figure out some kind of theory. And so we went and wrote them down. White is command, red is engineering, orange is science, pale gold is operations, green is medical, and gray is security. So there you go.
Well, there you are. Now it makes sense.
Now it makes sense, yeah.
So what's striped?
Oh.
The carbon unit's information cannot be disclosed to V'ger's probe, but only to V'ger.
Interesting, talking about the archaeology of digging behind sets. We were helped so much in the nonfiction books we wrote about the production history of Star Trek by Herman Zimmerman, who came on for Next Generation and then, I guess, Star Trek V. But he found all these boxes of leftover artwork from all the movies, sort of in the basement or in a storage unit underneath one of the stages. And
saved it.
Saved it. Just
put it in a
wonderful.
trailer, and we used that for Art of Star Trek and Phase 2.
And Next Generation 10th
Tribute.
anniversary.
What's the next move?
Question is, Mr. Decker.
Yeah, it's really a shame things can't be saved more. I mean, we understand storage is expensive, but there's just so much history with Star Trek.
Also shows a changing industry.
Absolutely.
Just in terms of what you save.
I do remember hearing that when Lucasfilm brought on sort of an archivist to take care of things like that, she was horrified to find that after the matte paintings had been used, they would scrape the paint off the glass so they could reuse the glass.
27 minutes. Mark.
Yeah, because in this case, the art is treated as a tool, basically. The film is the piece of art, and these are just elements to be used. But I'm glad that that attitude is slowly changing. Being a concept artist myself, that it's actually being treated with a little more respect these days.
Now, also, artists are signing their work. For a long time, they didn't. And now we found that we had a number of people who'd learned to sign their work throughout the Art of Star Trek.
I don't think it's being treated with any more respect. I think it's being looked upon as a profit center.
Well, that's what I mean.
We've talked with people who remember when Disneyland, they would just hand out or sell animation cells for 10 cents.
That's right.
The carbon units will now provide Visual with the required information.
Working on the director's edition, we were looking at a bunch of takes of that shot where Persis was told to keep her finger out of the way of the line of the view screen so that they wouldn't have to articulate the mat and draw around
she holds
her.
it 1 pixel below the mat line.
Yeah, in the shot that they used, it's just a tiny bit lower than the mat line, so they were able to use it without too much difficulty. And Uhura just wonders if she'll ever get to go on an away team.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't a photograph of the model. Is this is matte?
This is a matte painting that is skewed a bit because of the way that the live action element was photographed and the necessities of the shot.
And with that beautiful model, why do a matte painting?
Well, because frankly, the live action wouldn't line up with the real model. As we found out on the director's edition, we had to basically redo the whole thing because the live action is not usable with the actual Enterprise.
What didn't line up?
That light at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And here in the final sequence of the journey to the V'ger hub, there were a lot of corners that had to be cut to just get the film out the door, and we see a lot of things that were visualized more complex that were reduced to bare minimum to just get the movie done.
There were an astounding number of concepts for the inside of V'ger. When we were going through the art, everybody had a crack at it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's more art design for V'ger than any other single element in the entirety of Star Trek.
What we love is early on in the production history or the planning of this, JPL was actually going to loan their full-up life-size model of that probe. And like it was $1 million model, and they couldn't work out the insurance, so they built one.
which ended up working better. I think this is a 3/5 scale model.
You notice their ranking is on their jackets, the color of their ranking, and that's important to notice for a continuity glitch toward the end of the film.
Because of all the lighting gags, this had to be built on stilts, and there were a lot of areas which were quite thin because you had the projected light effect. That gizmo hanging down, that thing that looks like a can was on the real Voyager probe. That was their camera. That thing hanging down between Kirk and Spock. Now you would think that something that could build this entire complex could scrape out from the space mud.
Well, it's surprising to think that it would actually read its own name.
Right.
Voyager 6. NASA. National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Jim. This was launched more than 300 years ago.
Voyager series.
The Maisie series. The Annabelle series.
And transmitted back to Earth.
But now that was built with actual plans from JPL. Didn't they provide engineering drawings?
I believe they did, yes. It's quite accurate. It's a smaller scale, and the camera boom is shorter than it would have been. But maybe that's the difference between Voyager 1 and Voyager 6.
Now, Kirk certainly knows ancient history.
He sure does.
That's the camera, except that the flat surface should be clear.
Well, obviously it was damaged during its tumultuous journey.
I knew that.
Captain, Voyager 6 disappeared into what they used to call a black hole.
How does he know that?
Interestingly enough, he was just reading about it the other week.
The machine inhabitants found it to be
We figure at that time, though, just as there are Civil War reenactors today, they're Apollo mission reenactors. And on weekends, he would dress up in an old spacesuit
and go to the moon. They would go to the moon and reenact it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Return that information to its creator.
Well, other people reenact the budget cuts.
The machines interpreted it literally. They built this entire vessel so that Voyager could actually fulfill its programming.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
On its journey back. It amassed so much knowledge. It achieved consciousness itself. It became a living thing.
Do we know the order in which was this actually shot toward the end?
I don't remember. I think it must have been, because there's a lot of story elements that were resolved in these scenes.
Order of the ship's computer library of records.
But I'm not exactly sure. I don't have the.
Voyager 6.
I believe it was, yes.
We want the old NASA code signal.
We never see this shot again.
To transmit its data. Faster, Laura, faster.
Aye, sir.
That's what it's been signaling.
We see them use the risk communicator a couple of times in the movie, but that's the most
Who could recognize the old signal and
dramatic one.
The Creator does not answer.
And there's various stages of color shifts in the scene to denote the mood of V'ger at any given time.
V'ger.
Remember when the picture came out, the vendor that provided the color lighting gels actually took out ads in trade journals saying that that we provided the colors for this scene.
That is not logical. Carbon units are not true life forms.
We will prove it. We will
will make it possible for you to complete your programming. Only the Creator could accomplish that. Enterprise.
We have just received the response code, Captain.
Set the Enterprise transmitter on appropriate frequency and transmit the code now.
Transmitting.
504.
We never really get to see the use of the tricorders during the movie. We see when the real Ilia drops her is when she's whisked away. But I always thought that these were pretty cool and extensions of the original series while being completely new.
It was surprisingly ergonomic when Nimoy uses it. It looks completely normal, but if you grab it with two hands like Decker's using it, it looks kind of awkward.
Nimoy always knew how to handle props. I remember even from the original series, Nimoy always showed the audience the interesting side of the tricorder while he was using it, making it more visually interesting.
It's interesting that in the prop design, one of the touchstones of Star Trek in every incarnation has been the flip-open communicator. Well, no, I guess not in Next Generation, but that they bypassed it in this and then returned to it for the rest of the movies.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an understandable decision. You want to do something that's more advanced, and then after you've done it, you realize, oh, we've lost one of our icons.
Voyager is not transmitting, Captain, because it did not receive the final sequence.
Jim, we're down to 10 minutes.
Enterprise, stand by.
Oh, yeah, that thing, Earth. Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, right.
I forgot about that.
I think it's broken.
The antenna leads are melted away.
Yes, Captain.
Don't touch it. It would be bad.
Why?
To prevent reception.
Of course. To bring the Creator here.
I want him to say why again.
Transmitting the code in person. To touch the Creator.
Capture God. V'ger's liable to be in for one hell of a disappointment.
Perhaps not, Doctor.
And now the lighting system goes into overdrive.
Those swirling light things are done by the same guys who did the swirling light gag in the engine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very cool effect. Surprisingly simple. It's a drum or a shape wrapped with reflective material, and it just spins.
Now this was the section of the scene that was most worked on.
V'ger must evolve. Its knowledge has reached the limits of this universe.
Most worked on in terms of?
In terms of finding out what to explain to the audience. And to figure out what actually is V'ger's purpose. What is his goal?
The existence of which cannot be proven logically. Therefore, V'ger is incapable of believing in them.
What V'ger needs in order to evolve is a human quality. Our capacity to leap beyond logic.
Just like Spock.
And joining with its Creator might accomplish that. You mean this machine wants to physically join with a human? Is that possible?
Let's find out.
Now that's a true Star Trek moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the intellectual journey of it all.
Decker, I'm gonna key the final sequence through the ground test computer.
Decker, you don't know what that'll do to you.
Yes, I do, Doctor.
A great moment.
Decker, don't.
It's a good thing he knows how NASA spacecraft are wired.
Well,
It's those reenactments.
he's a reenactor. Beautiful music cue here by Jerry Goldsmith.
And she looks stunning,
doesn't she?
And in terms of Star Trek storytelling, it's almost a tradition that they go out looking for an enemy, but they realize that when they understand what they're facing, it's not an enemy.
Right.
And this is where that powerful light came up.
Yeah.
This light was apparently from the same type of light that is used in drive-in movie theaters. and apparently was extremely hot. And of course, the beautiful moire pattern that is animated over Stephen Collins there by Robert Swarth in the animation department. It's actually pretty simple to do when you realize it. It's basically just a bunch of squiggles that are moved against each other and on transparencies. And so they create this moving diaphanous form.
But it has tremendous dimension, especially later on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I read that Persis Khambatta, throughout the entire sequence when she's the probe, she made it a point never to blink on camera, which of course made it worse for her in this scene.
Yeah, I was so impressed with Persis Khambatta. It's such a tragedy that she passed away so young.
Now that's the model.
That is the model.
Yeah.
And we get a chance to see those sections that we flew over earlier.
But not for long.
And one of my favorite shots of the Enterprise here, as the light fades out and we see the old girl coming toward us. Gorgeous.
Unscathed.
Bound for adventure. And all is well.
Captain. Spock. Did we just see the beginning of a new life form?
Yes, Captain.
Now we'll notice Spock and McCoy and the colors they're wearing.
Yes.
The stripes on their shoulders.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a long time since I delivered a baby, and I hope we got this one off to a good start.
I hope so, too. I think we gave it the ability to create its own sense of purpose.
Which is what these guys have just done with Star Trek.
Exactly.
By bringing it back to life.
That compels us to overcome them. And a lot
I think we would say there are sort of four pivotal moments in Star Trek history, and the first is The Cage, which got it started. The second is this movie, because it made Star Trek into a movie franchise. Then Encounter at Farpoint, which proved that
Next Generation.
that Star Trek could transcend the original crew, because the metaphor and the storytelling that Gene Roddenberry had created was that large and could encompass so much.
And now
then,
the new movie with J.J. Abrams.
and that will be that'll be the next stage in evolution.
And in fact, a lot of the troubles that this film went through was specifically because it was such a dramatic change. They were trying to figure out what should Star Trek become. And in retrospect, it seems obvious, but when they were going through this, it very, very much wasn't.
You see the color change in the jackets.
Yes.
Now, some stories have it that they did that on purpose. I don't know.
You know, I actually talked to D. Kelly about that after it was filmed, and he acted genuinely surprised, but he could have been winking inside.
Now, here's this gorgeous shot of the Enterprise where we travel under and do a spin around. And this was actually done because Douglas Trumbull saw the shot that Dykstra's group did with the Klingon ships at the beginning, and he said, "Well, I can beat that one." And so he set up this shot to basically, bookend the movie with these two great shots.
And thematically, visually, it works to bookend.
And beautiful music.
Yep.
And the famous.
And that's it.
Ship blows up.
The thing we noticed when we were doing our research on the Phase 2 book was that when we were talking about what Star Trek had to become, Phase 2 was basically a fourth season. And we don't think it would have, Star Trek would have continued much past that, because it didn't change for the time, where this just opened up a whole literal universe for Star Trek. And I know it wasn't well received by the reviewers, And even the fans, they were so delighted to see all the elements there, but it didn't have the excitement they were hoping for. And we found an interesting thing that Roddenberry had written to a fan in 1974 when Paramount was first talking to him about a possible feature deal. It was before the deal was signed. And he said that Paramount's becoming aware that there are quite a few fans out there who will buy tickets to see almost any movie version of Star Trek. And that's the business end of it. And Gene said, naturally, I would hope to make it as good as possible, but Paramount has to consider the possibility that a motion picture can sometimes turn out to be something less than you hoped for, regardless of how hard you worked on it. And my answer to that has been that fans will still go see the picture so long as we give them Star Trek without cheating or cutting corners, especially if we give them the original actors too. And that's exactly what they did here. They presented Star Trek without cheating, without cutting corners, showing us things we've wanted to see for 10 years and never saw. And then the next stage in the evolution was the really tight story that came out in Star Trek II, where everything came together.
But this set the scene for it.
Yep.
I think in retrospect, I've always felt that this was the movie with the most scope of any of the original films. And I think it stands up very well over the test of time and isn't all that dated, which I can't really say for the other films. The other films seem a little less to me over the years, but this one has always remained...
There's a majesty in this one.
Yeah.
Epic quality.
Yes,
definitely.
exactly.
This is the first film that it knew it had large shoes to fill, and they had the resources to do it. And it reached further than any of the other pictures did.
And it was really fun watching it with you guys.
That's what I'd have to say too.
Yeah,
because we've learned a lot and appreciate it all the more now.
We wear different hats when we watch these motion pictures. On the TV series, we watch it as an entertainment. We've watched it as research projects. But it's really the best when you get in a room with friends and you just watch the picture together. So I had a good time, I hope.
I enjoyed this human adventure.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us all.
Yeah.